at AARP, we love to survey our members, and we love to survey the general public to have a better understanding of how perception can help lead our livable community work. And so what we hear from our members and from the 45 plus population is that people want to be able to age in place. And what that means is people want to be able to stay in their home as long as possible. Even though the majority of our housing stock is quite old in Vermont and has been built for able-bodied 35-year-olds, but they also, if they can't stay in their home because their home becomes inaccessible, they want to stay in their community. Yeah, and how do we ensure that people are able to stay in their community? When we look around, and the majority of our communities have been built around the movement of single occupancy vehicles. And so we want to think about how we can support older adults to be able to age in place, and what our communities are mixed use development with multi modes of transit, different ways to get around, and a variety of housing types. Next slide, please. So millennials and baby boomers, what they want in their communities is actually quite similar. Often we put millennials and baby boomers in two different buckets, but what they are looking and seeking for in their neighborhoods have a lot of similarities. And it's really important to also recognize that millennials and baby boomers are really open to trading off for a smaller home for a shorter commute and to be in a more walkable neighborhood. So boomers and millennials want a low maintenance home, they want walkability, and they want to be near amenities and services like a park, a bus stop, a hospital, a drugstore, restaurants, and they want to be able to stay active in their community. Next slide, please. So AARP and in collaboration with the World Health Organization have outlined 8 domains of livability. And so what those 8 domains of livability really try to get at is key components that go into creating a livable community. We need some level of compactness. This helps make a community more walkable, it decreases automobile dependence, and it supports a socially vibrant public realm and a local economy. We need the integration of land uses, which helps older adults live closer to or within walking distance of work, community activities, and services they need. So thinking about where we're putting assisted living and nursing homes, they're often out in rural strips of land where there's no sidewalk, there's no connection to the downtown or village center. We also need to think about housing diversity to help to ensure that appropriate housing is available for each stage of our lifespan. So thinking for your own life, right? So think about all the different types of housing that you may have needed when you left your parents' home. And then lastly, we need transportation options to help older adults remain independent, mobile, and engaged in their community. And next, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Tiffany, to talk a little bit more about dementia-friendly communities.
Thanks, Kelly. Before we get started on dementia-friendly communities, I wanted to share a little background on how this movement is starting in Vermont. Next slide. Dementia-Friendly Vermont is a project that's led by the Governor's Commission on Alzheimer's disease and related disorders, and this effort started in 2019. The role of the commission is to identify key public policy issues related to ADRD, Alzheimer's disease related disorders, to educate the public and private sectors regarding these matters, and to make policy recommendations in support of developing programs and services essential to providing accessible and appropriate services to people with dementia illnesses and to the families and other care partners. And as you'll see from our 2020 membership, there's diverse representation from a variety of sectors of the Aging Services Network, registered nurses, area agencies on aging, state senate, nursing home administrators, SASH, legal profession, family caregivers, state legislature, UVM Center on Aging, residential care, social workers, clergy, adult day providers, home health, Vermont Department of Health, physicians, mental health providers, and the business community. And along with this membership, we also have a large group of passionate advocates and stakeholders from across the state who are actively engaged with the commission's efforts and participate in the subcommittees. Next slide. So what is a dementia-friendly community? A dementia-friendly community is informed, it's safe and respectful of individuals living with dementia, their families and caregivers, and it provides supportive options that foster a quality of life. Next slide. So who is supported by dementia-friendly communities? Nationally, we see nearly 60% of people with dementia living at home, and 1 in 7 of those individuals live alone. Specifically in Vermont, we saw 13,000 people aged 65 and over diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease in 2020. We anticipate seeing an increase of 30.8% to 17,000 individuals in the next 3 years. Next slide. Who else is supported by dementia-friendly communities? Care partners and families. We know that there are 25,000 family or informal caregivers who are providing 36 million total hours of unpaid care that has a total value of $717 million. 83% of help provided to older adults in the United States comes from family members and friends and other unpaid caregivers. And nearly half of all caregivers who provide help to older adults do for someone with Alzheimer's or another dementia. Next slide. What I'd also like to acknowledge here is that in Vermont, we have unique challenges due to the mostly rural nature of the state. And these challenges include difficulty accessing health services, transportation challenges, loneliness, social isolation, and responding to emergency situations can take longer in a rural state. Next slide. So what is the Dementia Friendly America model? Dementia Friendly America, DFA, launched in 2015 at a White House Conference on Aging. The goal of this program is to effectively support those living with dementia and their care partners who are living in community and using an all sectors approach. This Dementia Friendly America model was modeled after Minnesota's Act on Alzheimer's. USA Aging, the National Association of Area Agencies on Aging, is the fiscal agent and program administrator for DFA. And these are live links in the slide to, if you'd like to explore the programs more. Next slide. So like I said, this effort is centered around an all sectors approach. And here you'll see listed some of the main sectors of community that Dementia Friendly America has created simple step-by-step guides and toolkits specific to each sector that can assist in building dementia capability and friendliness into their organization. And so we're looking at banks, financial services, neighbors, community members, legal, advanced planning services, libraries, home and community-based services supports, and so on. And again, in this slide deck, you'll be able to click on each of these bullets and be taken to more information of what these guides and toolkits look like. Next slide. So how are other states and communities in the DFA network approaching this work? First of all, we have to clarify that, what is a community? And using this model, community is self-defined. It can be geographic, like a city, a town, a county, or a state, but it can be a sector-specific community. So this could be an organization of regional or statewide libraries. This could be an association of community support. And I think of like Southeast Vermont, the CARES groups that really kind of help people find those resources within community. This could be a school or just even a school club. It's really broad and kind of whoever wants to really dedicate themselves to this work. You don't have to be associated with a very formal organization or area. So each community who pledges to use the DFA model determines the approach that best fits their needs. These should be small, achievable goals. It's following these guides, but not feeling like you have to take on an A to Z commitment to everything that is outlined. So this could look like offering training to faith communities on dementia basics. It could be requesting a library or a mobile library include dementia-friendly materials. Hosting a memory cafe for people with memory loss and caregivers. And anyone who's not familiar with memory cafes, they're organized events that provide a purposeful engagement activity for individuals experiencing cognitive decline and their caregivers. Partnering with local schools to provide the Dementia Friends program, and that is a dementia education program that's a sister program to Dementia Friendly America, and helps reduce stigma and build confidence in living in community with your fellow community members who might need additional assistance. This could look like working with local restaurants for dementia-friendly dinners once a month, working across key groups to support vulnerable rural residents during adverse weather, Also collaborating with law enforcement on training, ID bracelets, or file of life initiatives. Next slide. So if you would like to learn more about how your community, organization, or sector can be part of Dementia-Friendly Vermont, you can contact me, tiffany.smith@vermont.gov. Thank you. I'd like to turn it back over to Kelly.
Great. Thanks so much, Tiffany. That was really excellent. And I really appreciate hearing some of those stats, particularly as it relates to the rural nature of our state. And these issues are so connected. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about transportation specifically, and then how we can think about incorporating complete streets and walkability into our communities. Next slide, please. As Tiffany highlighted, the risks of dementia, living alone, feeling isolated, and how that risk can increase and impact an individual's health, both their mental and physical health. So the majority of older adults in Vermont are living in more rural areas in our state, and often their independence is really tied to the ability to be able to drive. It's estimated that we will all outlive our driving years. That's all of us here on this call as well. And so roughly women will outlive their driving years by 10 and men will outlive their driving years by 7. So thinking about ways that people are able to continue to remain independent and connected to their community is really important to their overall health. I have here up on the slide that isolation and loneliness present health risk equivalent to smoking 15 cigarettes a day. We all know the impacts of tobacco, and we see a decrease in tobacco use over the last 2 decades, and isolation itself has the same impact on our health. So making sure that older adults stay connected and engaged in their community is really critical. Next slide, please. Pedestrian safety is a key component to this. So I want to really emphasize the importance of safety and the fact that speed and safety, you can't prioritize both of these. So if you're going to prioritize the movement of fast vehicles over that of pedestrian safety, it won't happen. And so the impact that safety has on people's ability to be able to walk is huge. So the number one reason people do not walk places is because they do not feel safe. And often that is related to driver behavior. And the risk, we've seen an increase in fatalities, pedestrian fatalities across the country. This includes Vermont as well. This report is from 2021 from Smart Growth America. But I want to emphasize the piece that the risk is not evenly distributed. Older adults, people of color, people walking in low-income communities are disproportionately represented in fatal crashes involving people who are walking, even after controlling for differences in population size and walking rates. And so this is a really important piece if we want to make sure that our communities are safe for all pedestrians. Next slide, please. So creating livable communities through complete streets. Complete streets are safer streets. Complete streets consider all users of the road and people of all abilities of the road. So in far too many of our communities, it can be really impossible for you to be able to get around without a car. And in too many Vermont communities, sidewalks are few and far between. And for too many years, we've had transportation policies serve mostly fast-moving vehicles rather than public transit, biking, and walking. But a street that is safe for an 80-year-old to be able to safely cross and for an 8-year-old to be able to walk back and forth to school is safe for everyone. Complete, smartly planned streets and transportation options are great for people of all ages. So how do we go about doing that? Next slide, please. Our streets are our biggest public asset. They're a public space that we can really think differently about. And the 4 sort of key ingredients that I want to talk about is increasing and enhancing overall accessibility, making our streets comfortable and inviting and appealing for people, safety, making sure that we address driver behavior and important intersections and overall connectivity so that people feel safe walking around, and making them social. So what I mean by that is thinking about the connection that our streets have to other public spaces that invite people to be with others outdoors. I think, certainly in the last 2.5 years during COVID, our public spaces have gotten so much attention because it's been the only place where people feel safe meeting out with friends and family. And that importance should continue on as we think about important investments that should be made in our public spaces. Next slide, please. Accessibility. So considering all abilities and all abilities throughout the year. So winter maintenance is critical when we're thinking about accessibility, making sure that we are prioritizing winter maintenance, removal of snow and ice from our sidewalks and crosswalks. So here we have an image of a gentleman in a wheelchair on the left-hand side, beautiful curb cut. We've got tactile strips, but if you look across the street from him, there's no crosswalk designating that this is a crosswalk, no signage. And then when he gets to the other side of the side of the street, there's no way for him to get back up onto the other end of the sidewalk. So that overall connection is critical. Thinking about curb cuts, bulb outs as well, extending the sidewalk so that motorists have better view of pedestrians who need to be able to cross the street safely. And signage is also really important. Next slide. Thinking about walking and biking options. So it's going to range based upon your community, the population, how rural nature your community is. So the image on the left, we've got separated uses. We've got a sidewalk. We've got a little nice strip of buffer greenway, and then we've got a designated bike lane. There's no protection for that bike lane, but it certainly has lots of space for somebody to be able to bike, and it keeps bicyclists off of the sidewalk. That's one thing that we often hear from older adults, is that they would bike more if they had a protected bike lane, and that they feel often unsafe on sidewalks when there are people skateboarding or biking on the sidewalk. So separating those uses depending upon how heavy the traffic is. The image in the middle is obviously a rural road, and so really utilizing the fog line there and making sure that you've got a shoulder where people can walk and bike there. Next slide, please. A few different bike options. So these are all the images here you see are all temporary in nature. So, and John Kaplan from VTrans will talk even more so about demonstration projects, but this is a great way to be able to test different ways to be able to utilize your street, and finding ways that people want to be able to move around, and testing different bike lanes is a great way to do that. The images on the left you see are from Bethel, Vermont, and that was a temporary project, and removing on-street parking and creating a temporary bike lane using some stenciling and some temporary paint can really help change things. And it's also a great way to be able to get community feedback and input in improving mobility options in your community. Next slide, please. So crosswalks and intersections are really important when we think about overall walkability. Often we want to be able to observe how people are crossing the street, whether or not they're using the crosswalks available. Perhaps they're using other desired paths to be able to get from one end of town to the other, and looking at where those crosswalks connect to other places. The bottom right-hand corner is in Pittsford, Vermont. And this is where my husband grew up, and this sidewalk is the sidewalk to nowhere. So you have a crosswalk and then it just ends. There's no place to go after that sidewalk. And what that means for somebody who is using a wheelchair, a walker, pushing a baby stroller, has other types of disability, makes it really hard for that person to be able to move around in the community. So being able to observe driver behavior in intersections is also really important. We have a wonderful walk audit tool that's available on AARP's Livable Communities website. It's a great tool to be able to make some evaluations of your community and some great observations to draw some next steps of how you can improve walkability. Next slide, please. Sidewalks and buffers. So not everywhere you're going to be able to put a sidewalk in, right? And so I had shared that slide earlier with the shoulder, but places where you're able to put sidewalks in and have a buffer and street trees can really help calm traffic and bring speeds down. And it can also reduce the noise level, make it more inviting and comfortable for people to walk around. And thinking about also where there's seating available for people to be able to rest along the way on sidewalks, where there's a lot of traffic, is another great way to make your community feel more inviting and more walkable. We did a walk audit up in Newport several years ago, and we observed a number of older adults walking to go to their grocery store and then walking back through town, and then there was no place for people to sit. And that was one of our biggest recommendations to the city after the walk audit, and they ended up putting benches back into the downtown, which was a great thing. It provided, and it not only provides a great environment, but it also is very functional. Next slide, please. Connectivity and public transit. Public transit is critical to providing independence for people who are not able to drive or choose not to drive based upon limiting their own climate footprint. And where we're placing bus stops is really important. So thinking about those amenities that are available for bus riders. Is there a bench? Is there a shelter? Is there lighting? Are we prioritizing snow removal in the winter for the riders? Those are all things that will help increase bus ridership. Next slide, please. So I'm going to share a couple of quick examples in Vermont that have really incorporated placemaking into activating their public spaces. So we talked a lot about the walkability and the connection through walking, biking, using public transit to get around in your community. But then I'd like to also share the importance of how we can activate some of those important public spaces. Next slide, please. So these are two examples. The one in Brattleboro, they used a small AARP mini placemaking grant that we have available. We'll be putting out our next round of placemaking grants right after Labor Day, and they'll be focused on winter placemaking. So please feel free to be in touch with me if you're interested in applying for those grants. They're roughly about $4,000 each. So down in Brattleboro, they focused in on their transit center, which is right next door to this alleyway. And this alleyway was dilapidated, it was run down, it felt really unsafe and uninviting for people to go through and then wait for the bus, which is a big deterrent if you want to be able to take the bus anywhere. And so they got a bunch of volunteers together, they cleaned out the alleyway, they put some chairs, they put some seating, some tables, they provided some activities, and they put life and color in there, and they also incorporated some wonderful signage as well. And it just dramatically changed the space and made it so much more inviting and usable as well. So the other image is from Montpelier Alive. This is in a parking lot that they use public art to activate it, to make it vibrant and exciting. This is where a location where the farmers market used to take place. The farmers market moved down the street now to a bigger location, but it's wonderful and it's beautiful and it's makes you want to be there. So it's amazing what a little bit of paint can do to a public space. Next slide, please. I'm just checking my time, make sure I'm doing all right. So this is another example in the Old East End neighborhood in Burlington. They also received an AARP grant. And we first did a walk audit in the community, and we noticed that driver behavior was quite poor. People were blowing through stop signs, rolling over, not stopping behind crosswalks. It was noisy. There was a ton of traffic. And so they incorporated some public art to help calm down the traffic, putting out large planters as well, and then working with DPW and the Parks Department to get some additional crosswalks. And then one thing that has been really exciting is the activation of a local park there, Szymanska Park, and thinking about this place as a year-round destination. And so they have done amazing things with winter placemaking. They've incorporated lighting, programming, and activities during the winter, some new signage. And then one of the other really great things is that they've gotten the Parks Department to be able to plow the sidewalk that goes into the park. And so it's now accessible year round to everybody. Next slide, please. Another great community doing some terrific work is in Northfield, Vermont. They've been doing things for 3 to 4 years around focused on pedestrian safety and walkability. We did a walk audit as well with this community, and they created a pop-up temporary walking lane. This was about 3 years ago, right before COVID. And this was a fantastic temporary lane just to be able to get community input and connect the common to Dog River Park. And so they did this with some stenciling, some cones, and some painted markers on the side with some really great community facts and information. Next slide, please. And then they've moved on to a semi-permanent painted lane, which is now in place, and with the goal of eventually getting a full sidewalk invested to be able to connect the community. Next slide, please. And then here too is a crosswalk. We actually did another demonstration project along with Local Motion this past May, and did a beautiful crosswalk with some temporary bulb outs as well, with just some chalk and some paint, and it was really terrific. And it's a great way to engage the community in the process, get their feedback. And one of the things that came out of the most recent demonstration project was hearing from the senior center director, who would like an additional crosswalk, because a lot of the seniors were not using this crosswalk. They were doing a little bit of a cut through to the back of the village and needed another crosswalk to reach the common. So it's a wonderful opportunity to get more community input in the process, and also community buy-in as well. So I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, John Kaplan from VTrans, who will go into much more detail about opportunities for low-cost placemaking projects. John?
Great, thank you, Kelly. It's a good segue into my section, hopefully. So I'm John Kaplan. I work for VTrans. I'm the bicycle and pedestrian coordinator, which I've had that position since 2009. But I've been in the bike and ped program for a little over 20 years, my whole career at VTrans, and been working on bike and pedestrian issues for almost 30 years, which is hard to believe. But anyway, so next slide. So I'm going to focus on some low-cost improvements that communities can do to make things safer for biking and walking. And I think, Kelly and the previous presenters kind of really, laid the groundwork for why this is important, because as people age and maybe don't drive anymore, having other ways to get around becomes even more important. So there tends to be kind of a focus, I would say, on like larger scale projects, like the kind of large shared use path type projects, or new sidewalks. But there's a lot of things that can be done that are relatively low cost and don't need to be that big major capital investment. So one simple one is just to narrow travel lanes. There are still a fair number of probably overly wide travel lanes around the state. And there is some research that shows that a 10 or 11 foot travel lane is the safest width for all road users on roads that are at 40 miles an hour or less. And so just by moving that edge line in and narrowing the travel lane results in additional shoulder space that people can use. And basically that's I call that a no cost project, because you have to have that edge line anyway. So it's not costing you anything different or anything more to change the location. Next. And then in a more kind of built up area, kind of around downtowns and village centers, If you have enough space, marking that shoulder as a bike lane can be another good improvement. And of course, the idea would be to have some kind of physical separation between the bike lane and where cars are. But if you don't have that space, at least getting the markings down kind of indicates to drivers a little bit more to expect bicyclists, and really kind of carves out that space for biking on the street. Next. So some of my slides talk about some maintenance issues. So it's great if you have a shoulder or a bike lane, but if it's got a bunch of gravel or glass or other things that accumulate there and never get swept out, then people who are using that shoulder are forced back out into the travel lane where it's less safe. So it is important to do that regular maintenance and sweep the shoulders periodically to get rid of that debris. Next. So there are a lot of signs out there that we try to use strategically to make things safer, especially at crosswalks. These signs happen to be at a school crosswalk, so they have that sort of home plate shape. But using the fluorescent yellow green, that's allowed, well, it's required for school signs, and then it's allowed for regular pedestrian signs. And I'm sure you've seen that fluorescent yellow green around. It really does kind of pop out and is much more visible. And that's really minimal added cost because it's just a different color sheeting that's used. Next. Another thing relative to signs that you can do to make them more visible is to add a colored strip on the sign post. Usually that strip is the same color as whatever the sign background is. And those are not very expensive, about $25 per sign. And if you've seen those, it does really help enhance the visibility of signs. If you're having an issue at a particular crosswalk and you want to make the visibility or improve the visibility. Next. This is another maintenance item. There is a sign behind those tree branches where the red circle is. That's at a crosswalk. And so, these types of things are kind of more of an ongoing issue where municipalities need to, be aware of those types of things and clear back tree limbs that are obscuring the signs and kind of keeping them from doing what they're supposed to do. Next. So crosswalks are really important, just having good marked crosswalks and getting those markings refreshed every year. A typical crosswalk, the sort of bid cost, including all the labor and everything, is about $500 for a 2-lane crossing. So we're not talking a big investment, and having that marking, it really helps to reinforce that that's where people are expected to cross. And there's some, data that shows a 40% reduction in pedestrian crashes when you have a marked crosswalk. So that's a really basic but important feature. Next. And then sort of how crosswalks interact with on-street parking, if that's in place near a crosswalk. State statute prohibits parking within 20 feet of a crosswalk at an intersection. And I know VTrans, we use that same guidance for a mid-block crosswalk like the one in this picture. So there actually is a person, you can't really see them, which is the whole point, but this parking space is too close to the crosswalk where that white van is. And you can see the problem is that the pedestrian just can't really be seen by cars that are traveling through. And it also makes it hard for the pedestrian to see, to know when that's safe for them to cross. And so kind of prohibiting parking within 20 feet of a crosswalk is a good practice. Next. Another low-cost feature, these in-street pedestrian signs. They're about $300 each. They get placed on the edge of the crosswalk at the road center line. And just another thing to help do some traffic calming and enhance the visibility of the crosswalk. And these have been shown to be pretty effective. On the state system, we do allow communities to put these in on the state system with a permit. And certainly, at the local level, that would just be a local decision to use one of these. Next. So we're kind of moving up in the scale of the improvements here. Pedestrian refuge islands are a great enhancement to an existing crosswalk, especially if it is a multi-lane crossing or a longer crosswalk. The whole idea is partly doing some kind of narrowing of the visual lane that a car driver is seeing to help keep their speeds down, because speed is a real critical factor in terms of pedestrian safety. The refuge kind of gives a location where pedestrians can just cross one direction of traffic at a time, wait if they have to in the middle, and then get a gap and finish their crossing to the other side. Next. Next slide. Back to Northfield for one of my pictures. So these are bulb outs that were put in. So these are a great feature. If you think back to that other picture with the white van and the parking relative to the crosswalk, bulb outs where you have on-street parking, they can be used to make the crossing shorter, first of all, and they put pedestrians out at a location where they can see traffic better, and also where cars can see that there's someone waiting. This is a little bit more of a costly feature. I think this is a good example of the town of Northfield. I know did a demonstration project with these bulb outs initially, just with some cones to sort of try out the idea, and then eventually they put in the actual more permanent infrastructure once they saw the benefit of this. Next. So these rectangular rapid flashing beacons, this is a somewhat new feature, and they also are a good enhancement to an existing crosswalk. Again, a little bit more expensive, about $10,000 to $15,000 for these, because there's some electronics involved and you have to put a foundation in for the post. And we're trying to use these strategically around the state where they're really needed. Next. And then just providing sidewalks in general. If you see kind of this worn-in path where people are walking, that's a real indication that there's a need for a sidewalk. And again, thinking about people who use some kind of mobility device, if this is the environment that they have to get through, that's a barrier for them. So next. Talked a little bit about maintenance, and that includes winter maintenance. So if you have sidewalks, you need to keep them clear of snow in the winter, because people still need to get places in the winter, and we have quite a few months of that here in Vermont. So that is a part of providing sidewalks, is keeping them clear of snow. Next. Another fairly low cost feature is just providing some bike parking. That can be fairly simple, like the picture shown on top, or in some cases providing a little bit more with some kind of cover over the bike parking in case it rains during the day. And the cost really varies, but just a basic bike rack is under $200. So, all right. Yeah, and just a couple more slides. Providing this infrastructure doesn't always need to be like a standalone project. So think about opportunities to do that with other infrastructure work that's happening, just regular paving, or like a water and sewer project where you might have an opportunity to put in a new sidewalk. Next. We've talked a little bit about demonstration projects. I think Kelly covered that pretty well. And it's an opportunity to try out a design before making it permanent. Like I pointed out with the Northfield example, they can be pretty quick, low cost, get some public input, and Local Motion, an organization in Burlington that covers the whole state. They have a trailer full of materials to help you do your demonstration project. So that's a good resource for that. Next. All right, and I've got the first couple of next slides, so you can go ahead. So we have a design resources page on the Agency of Transportation website. And I think it's in the resource list that is going to get sent to participants after this. And we've tried to gather like state and national resources all in one place to make it easy to implement some of these things. Next. There also are grant opportunities through both our agency as well as Agency of Commerce and Community Development, and directly through Federal Highway. There's a new program called Safe Streets and Roads for All, as well as the AARP grants that Kelly mentioned. Next. Yep, and there are websites or links for all of that, and that's all going to be in that resource list. Next. All right, and I think I'm not sure who's taking over here, but
yeah, I'll just wrap us up and then we can get into discussion and questions. So we talked about a lot of resources today. Don't feel the need to quickly jot them down. We'll send out a really comprehensive resources list. We'll send out a recording of the webinar, this PowerPoint, and then there'll be a short survey as well. So we have lots of stuff that you'll get just after the webinar. So we'll just go to the next slide and leave it open for discussion. So there's some questions here that you can feel free to answer. If you have other questions, feel free to ask them. If you want to use the raise hand feature, that might be easiest, or just jump in, but there's a, where is the, oh, it's under react. If you go to the reactions tab with the little smiley with the plus, there's a little hand raise symbol. Matthew? And do you want to take us, actually, no, never mind. Sorry, go ahead, Matthew. You can unmute yourself.
Yes, I'm going to jump into it right now.
Great,
yes,
perfect.
my town, I'm going to say my town needs all of the above. It really does need that because of, where I live. And like I said, we live so close, to the Canadian border and New York, traffic is horrendous in some cases, but there's nothing much you can do with most rural towns. Yeah, do with what you have. But yeah, my main concern question to everyone is, where do you see this project moving forward into the future for citizens with disabilities, senior citizens, veterans, with walking and safety, in mind? I mean, grants are hard to come by. We know that. And I'm on the planning commission and I help my select boards find out ways, to improve viability, accessibility around this important topics you all mentioned, because Vermont is an aging demographic, state, and all the towns, including mine, have to, fight for grants, just to make sure we have opportunity to supply and demand those resources so we can actually get to where they need to be. Is there a way that we all can come together and actually fix this program or enhance it or modify it in a way where it benefits everyone? Because everybody has a right to walk, in these, places, but it's hard to do so if they're worried about safety. Like my town, I'm gonna put it for an example. I don't want my town to actually have to put these in place if someone gets hit. It's just a cost to the town. It's when somebody gets in an accident, it just costs in general. Is there a way we could, not only coincide together around these issues, but is there a way where we can get all what we want in a way that, what meets the town's best interest and needs? Thank you.
Hey, Sue, could you take off the screen share? I just put the questions in the chat. Did anybody have any thoughts on that? Kelly?
Great question, Matthew. And I hear the struggle. I would suggest first sort of starting with doing a walk audit with as diverse of a group as you can pull together in your community. So being able to bring together older adults, kids, parents, business owners, select board members, if there's a local health department that services your community. So bringing together like a very rich group of stakeholders and going out and doing a series of walk audits to identify what specific issues people are encountering when they're walking, and then help to prioritize what investments are essential to being made, right? So there's going to be, I'm sure you probably know a lot of those important areas that need to be addressed, but hearing from the community is so important, and getting them engaged and seeing the value of making those types of investments is really important. And one of the best things that sort of happens along a walk audit is the dialogue, right? Is the dialogue between those decision makers and elected officials, planning commission members with the public, and seeing it through somebody else's lens. And because often, I mean, we're all guilty of this, as we walk through the world through our own sort of view. And so being able to open that up and experiencing your community through different abilities, different backgrounds is so important. So, and then I think connecting with other leaders like John and Tiffany from state agencies, Department of Housing and Community Development is another really good one, and the health department, and like piecing together some of those funding opportunities. Not all the funding requires a local match, but certainly that I know can be a barrier too. So that and I'm more than happy to connect with you offline about organizing a walk audit.
Thank you very much, because that's what the town is, like most rural towns, we don't know about these because with limited broadband capabilities and stuff. It's just, this is the first time I heard of a walk audit. So this is why I say we're missing these important pieces to the, conversation and discussion we're having, because for me, it's like we're missing something here. Is there any ways to make sure we know exactly what we need to do? But thank you. Yes, I would look forward to have that, discussion and conversation. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. And I'll put my email too in the chat.
Yeah, and I would be happy to help support that as well. So like we came to the right webinar, because I think it could be great for us to work together, and having your perspective on the planning commission is so great, because so many planning commissions don't. So you're really thinking about these things, and that's huge. I wrote down your email too, so I can connect with you, and you'll get our emails afterward. I'm going to ask the question of Karen in the chat. Does anyone know of any programs or successes around transportation options for aging citizens who are struggling with diminishing cognition and memory? Kelly, do you want to get this one?
Sure. I can't
Or
say
Tiffany,
that
sorry.
Oh, sorry. Okay. I'll let Tiffany answer this one.
Well, that's okay. And I'm just about to enter. I was answering it in the chat. But one program that does come to mind is our Older Americans Act funding, which is a federal program. It's available in all states, but that does provide support for older adults 60 and over with or without cognitive impairment, but individuals with cognitive impairment are prioritized under that work. And it provides support for them to access transportation and assisted transportation, which is if somebody really needs physical assistance to help get on or off a bus or in a vehicle. And so there is programming to support that specifically through that federal program.
Great, thank you. Thanks for your question, Karen. Ross, did you want to go ahead?
Sure, thanks, Allie, and thanks for the invite. Yes, in Vermont, about 700,000 trips a year are provided to persons who are over 60, persons with disability and Medicaid clients. We're expanding the eligible trips for those in recovery, seeking job access. That's the one of the better ways we feel we can address some of the aging demographics in our communities by expanding our existing demand response services. The best way to investigate trip potential would be to go to Go Vermont and take a look at the bus services. And there's 7 regional providers. Click on the one in the region that you're looking to originate your trip from, and their schedulers and dispatchers are available by phone to talk to you about which program and which funding meets their needs as best as possible.
Are there any other last questions or thoughts?
I was just going to respond partly to Matthew's comments. I think, one of the reasons that I like to focus in on those like low cost improvements is, there's a lot of need out there. If you look at your whole community in terms of like biking and walking access, there's going to be more needs than can be done. You can't just like tackle it all at once. And so that kind of planning and prioritization is really important, and pick away at some of the really high need issues, but also get at some of those like low-hanging fruit things that are pretty easy, like making sure that crosswalks are remarked and things like that. And that Safe Streets for All program that is available directly through federal highway as part of the new infrastructure bill really has that as its structure. I think they call it a like comprehensive safety action plan or something like that. And that's basically how it's set up. It's like, partner with other organizations within the community, look at where the highest needs are, prioritize, and then start. And then it has funding to actually like implement that down the road. That's 5 years of funding that they are going to have available, as part of that new infrastructure bill.
Yeah, I'll also add that I'm sure you've worked with them, but the regional planning commissions can be really great resources on, they'll kind of hear what's happening in other communities that you might not hear about, and just have a lot of great connections to maybe help kind of make those sort of regional connections. All right. Is there any other last thoughts before we wrap up? Matthew, did you have anything else, or is that old hand?
No. There's another one for the transportation about the busing. I just a question in general. Moving forward, with the transportation of busing, and microtrans, not everybody works from 9 to 5 in the state of Vermont. We got first shift, second shift, and third shift, overnight shifts, and there's a gap between the overnight shifts and the first shifts, because a lot of people don't work 9 to 5, and that's also another accessibility barrier too as well, going forward, because my dad's actually 65-year-old veteran that works in Williston, and if he doesn't have a vehicle, he's stranded. They're all stranded, and that's something I wanted to make that emphasize about that not all bus schedules follow that exact timeline. So it's like first, second, and third shift. They're all different, times, but the accessibility needs are revolving around first and second, but not third shift. Where I see that as also a problem too as well, because not everybody can have a specific time to get home or a specific time to get off work to make that bus, make that bus connection too as well. Moving forward, it's just something to bring up. Thank you.
Yeah, that is a great point. And I think so often we make decisions and not as people having lived experience, right? Like we work 9 to 5 and we're not hearing from the people who some of these programs directly affect. So I really appreciate your thoughts, Matthew, and for being here today. So I'm going to wrap this up. Thank you all so much for being here, for spending your time with us today. Again, we'll send everything out within the next week. So I hope you all have a good day.